What we see transpiring right now inside of Russia is proving an old rule of Russian history. When things seem like they're really bad, that they're just unbelievably grim, like things could possibly not get worse. Usually, they do get worse, much worse. Because what we see inside of Russia are more than just the drone strikes. What we're seeing is the destruction of Russia's carefully manufactured image, the one the Putin regime relies on. The image that it is the creator, the guarantor of stability. That image is collapsing. It's collapsing in plain sight. And what we've seen just in the past couple of days have been phenomenal. Just look at the fact that the airports are going dark. The oligarchs are being dragged off their private airplanes. Entire regions, as of today, are being cut off from the internet. They're no longer connected to the outside world. And the reason is very simple. The Kremlin is panicking. The Kremlin does not know what to do because Ukraine's drone strikes did more than just damage infrastructure. They ignited a cascading crisis. It's a crisis that the Kremlin does not know how to conceal. It does not know how to control. And confronted with these unprecedented attacks by Ukraine deep inside of Russia, the Putin regime cannot offer unity and resilience or a plan to protect its citizens. It only has desperation. It can offer censorship, purges, and economic self sabotage. And all these are simply the symbols, the signs that we should look for, is that the regime is beginning to cannibalize itself. And as I've been arguing for a long time now, the Putin regime is far weaker than what many people appreciate. And for those that know Russian history well, what we see today is Vladimir Putin is in a corner. And it's incredibly enough that every day we see more news that points to the fact that his regime does not know what to do. His regime does not know how to get out of the corner that it's in. So today we're going to dive into that. More than just the drone strikes, which we'll discuss, very few people are talking about what does this mean in the larger context of the war, but also for Putin's regime, for his stability, and the chance that somebody will take advantage of it to end the Putin regime forever. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post, where I'm sitting right now, here in Kiev, Ukraine. But I'm also a political scientist who has spent 20 years studying the Putin regime. And I've been working against it the entire time, which led to me being thrown out of Russia. But also working against other authoritarian regimes and studying them, I've come to a lot of conclusions as to what it is that we should be looking for if we truly want to see the end of the Putin regime. What's necessary? What would those last days look like? Where would we find those weaknesses in society that lead from just being a teetering regime to a regime in free fall? And what we see in Russia today are certainly not signs of stability. I don't think that anybody who studies political science or Russia would argue that the situation in Russia today is good. All the signs that we see, all the tea leaves that we can read, indicate that Russia's leadership is simply fracturing under the tremendous weight it faces from these unending humiliations by Ukraine striking throughout Russian territory. It's been simply phenomenal. So we'll dig into that today. What does this all mean? And since we're on the topic of drone strikes, I'll leave in the first comment below, the pinned comment, a link to help Ukraine get more drones so that we can see more of these tremendous drone strikes inside of Russia and inside of Ukraine, protecting its territory from the Russian invaders. Please like this video, please subscribe, and please consider becoming a member of the channel, which helps me get this message to more people to understand what is really transpiring inside of Russia and what this all means in the global context. Thank you. So let's look at this just in the past few days. There are plenty of signs that Russia's leadership is cannibalizing itself. Just today, July 7th, guess who they fired? The Minister of Transport, Roman Starovoyt. Now, Roman is interesting because Roman was the transport minister, abruptly fired, and it appears that was done because Putin needs to show that somebody was responsible. A scapegoat has been identified for the current outages. Russian airports have faced dozens of cancellations or hundreds of cancellations, and it's simply every day getting yet worse. So, fire the transport minister. Now, who gains from that? Well, the intelligence service, the FSB, and the military do, because they're already pointing fingers at each other as to who's responsible for the drone strikes inside of Russia. So neither will take credit for that. And of course, Vladimir Putin could never be to blame for the current situation. So let's blame him. Now, honestly enough, what's interesting about Starovoyt was he's the former governor to Kursk, Russia. And according to Reuters, one of the reasons he was already under investigation was because he embezzled all the money that was meant for the defensive lines to prevent Ukraine from invading, which Ukraine did invade and occupied Kursk, Russia. He stole that money, and his deputy is already in jail. But why today? Putin undoubtedly knew that he'd engaged in that corruption. Why today would he decide he needs to be fired? It's a scapegoat. They need to take the attention off of who's responsible for what's going on inside of Russia. And Putin's regime is showing more and more signs that it's scared and not sure of what to do. It's not just ministers. Look at one of the biggest oligarchs in the country, Konstantin Strukov. He owns massive gold company. He owns, in fact, the third largest gold producer in all of Russia. He's also a member of Putin's party. He's an elected official for Putin's party. Well, guess what? The Russian intelligence service not only raided his company, and not only is seeking to nationalize 100% of his company's shares, they arrested him as he sat on his jet waiting to depart for Turkey. So, why do they do this? What do these events mean together? So, first, he was trying to flee the country, and that sends a signal to everybody. If you're not on Team Putin all the way, if you're not willing to stick it out to the very bitter end, we'll go after you, and we'll take everything that you have. But there's something else. It shows that the regime truly is desperate. Strukov is a guy who had spent incredible sums of money to support the Putin regime, to support the political party of Vladimir Putin. But that past loyalty, those previous contributions, they all show that ultimately he, like any other oligarch, is expendable. If you turn against the regime, if you don't look like you're faithful, you are not untouchable. Why would Putin do that now? It's because Putin is trying to consolidate power. He knows that there are people within the ranks who are perhaps not loyal, those that were there for the good times who don't want to be here now for the bad times, and any of those people could conspire against him. Putin is now trying to get rid of them. He is trying to also raise cash for his cash-starved country. To give you an idea how cash-starved the country is, their deficits now are breaking records. And they're only going to get worse because Ukraine's strikes inside of Russia, these deep, deep strikes with Ukrainian drones, they're more than just closing down the airports or being an inconvenience for passengers. Yes, just in the past day, 485 flights were canceled. About 1,900 were delayed. 88 were diverted. But it's more than that. Look at the major airports. Look at St. Petersburg, look at Moscow, look at Kaliningrad. In all cases, dozens of cancellations, dozens of delays. Pskov, Kaluga, Tambov, Ivanovo, operations fully suspended. Over 7,000 passengers were stuck in St. Petersburg alone. For hours they're sitting there. And they're not sure when their flights are ever going to take off because Ukrainian drones now are striking almost on a daily basis. Russia now is showing to the public that it cannot protect its citizens. And that's why the government was not very happy that people were posting regularly on a Russian Telegram, as well as on WhatsApp, that look, here's what it's like inside the airports. And there's pandemonium. And there's thousands of hungry, angry, tired people. And the government doesn't like that. That's not what they want to see. This visible chaos is not what they want to demonstrate that they represent. So they scrambled to control this. The state television, of course, said that it's just periodic interferences or periodic outages at the airports. But the Russian Telegram channels are open to the public. You can write whatever you want. Yes, it's monitored by the intelligence service, but in theory, you can write whatever you wish. So major channels like Moskva Ne Spit put up dozens of photos of people sleeping on the floors, people crying, people saying that they are going to lose huge amounts of money because of these flights being canceled. So what's the government do? The government cannot offer the people a solution and cannot come and say, look, here's our plan to secure the airspace. Here's our plan to protect you from the Ukrainian drones. They can't do that. So they can only do what they know, what only comes to them naturally, which is Soviet. It's censorship and the intention of trying to contain the story. Now, censorship worked in the Soviet Union for several reasons. But most importantly, unlike today, nobody had laptops. Nobody had cell phones. Today, the world is at your fingertips. And that's also vital for the national economy. But Russian authorities have no other solution. They don't know how to control these stories of the regular drone strikes from getting to a wider public. So just today, there are outages in 69 regions of Russia. 29 saw broadband failures. 4 restricted access to the internet only from home accounts. But when you look at the map of Russia, what part of Russia that is, it's essentially the entire thing. It's all the way from the far west to the far, far east. Look at Kamchatka Krai. Kamchatka Krai is on the border of Japan. It's 7,500 kilometers away from Ukraine. And they've disabled mobile internet access. And they said that this was being done for drone defense exercises. But I ask you, do you think it's more probable that this was done for exercises, turning off everybody's cell phones? So all of a sudden, nobody can order a taxi or a pizza or use their banking from their cell phone. They can't check their emails. They really turned off for that? Or is it because they really didn't want the population to know what was going on, that the situation was in chaos? The fact that they lost control of the airspace over the capital and the largest cities in the country. And I think what proves that direction as not just being a theory, but a fact, is that across major cities, especially Moscow, Down Detector, the website, shows that Telegram and WhatsApp have been out for hours. They're leaving millions in information vacuum. The officials don't know what to do. They don't want these images of visible chaos to reach the world. So they've elected for a digital blackout. And that's because in their eyes, this is worse than a battlefield defeat in Ukraine. If you lose a battle in Ukraine, you lose some village. Let's be real. Nobody in Russia knows where that village is located. They don't appreciate really was that a great gain or loss or indifferent. However, when you see Moscow's largest airport all of a sudden being closed down to Ukrainian drones, when you see drone strikes across your own country, a country that the leaders had promised was secure, well, the illusion that you've built is just shattered. Just imagine yourself. I try to often think of how to make this more real. Imagine in your own town tomorrow if you saw drones coming down on the highway, crashing into public buildings, crashing into military infrastructure, crashing into local factories. How much of a panic would that create in your village or your town or your city? How would the population respond? The Russians are responding about the same way because they realize what's going on here. We have this massive military. Why can't it defend us? And it's more than just fear in the population or the oligarchs who are getting arrested or the fact that the minister of transport gets fired because Putin has no solution. Look at the things that we can't hide. Look at the things that the Kremlin can't just act like everything's okay. The losses due to these outages of the aviation industry are estimated to exceed $250 million just in the past few days. That's according to Rosaviatsia, which is Russian aviation, the state agency. And think about all the indirect functions of this. Cargo is delayed, spare parts are delayed, things that people need for manufacturing are delayed, food that's being shipped starts to expire, dual use goods, which the military needs, are also delayed. And what that means is that the strain that they're already feeling just gets worse. And more than just the strain getting worse, it has a trickle down effect. The supply chain throughout the whole country is being affected by this. Throughout all of Russia is being affected by Ukraine's drone strikes. These cascading failures were detonated by Ukraine's drone strikes that we've seen since, as obviously beginning back in June 1st during Operation Spiderweb until today. Just last night, between the 6th and the 7th, 120 drones launched a massive coordinated effort across Russia. Many regions, including Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, saw dozens of drones. And for the first time across so many oblasts simultaneously, air defenses were forced to engage. The territory that Ukraine is now covering is simply incredible. A lot of these places are located 1,000 kilometers, 1,200 kilometers away from Ukraine. And Ukraine's reaching it. And the regime knows this is bad. It knows that Ukraine can strike anytime it wishes to, anywhere that it wishes to. And now this is going to bleed yet more resources, which the government's going to need for air defense. It's going to paralyze transport. And it's going to lead to a further damage to the economy. Because when you've cut off the internet to people, when you've cut off aviation to people, when you've cut off their ability to get supplies, how does it affect your economy? How does that affect consumer confidence? It's not going to be good. But what we see the Putin regime doing now, this lashing out, this trying to crack down on information, this need to try to control what's going on in the public or what the public says, this is quite literally the classic arc of authoritarian regimes that are under collapse. When the cumulative pressure becomes too much and they don't know what to do, they can't just make somebody a bad guy. They can't just say somebody failed and everyone will say, okay, now I understand why everything's a disaster. No, everybody sees the entire regime just cannot do its job. The regime is failing massively, systemically, and it's affecting everybody now in Russia. So at this point, we don't have to ask the question, can Ukraine disrupt Russia's rear? It's whether or not the Putin regime can survive the consequences of Ukraine attacking Russia anytime and anywhere it wishes. And the fact is, there's very little reason to believe that the Putin regime can survive this. As the cannibalization gets worse, and the FSB fights more with the military, and the military fights with FSB, and the oligarchs start to oppose Putin, things will get more and more tense within Russia. Thank you for listening today. Please like this video, please subscribe, and thank you, as always, for supporting Ukraine.